is the last presentation was in September 2023, so we're really happy to have everyone back here in this virtual room together. We sent this invitation to that same guest list, so that would be all local soil conservation districts across the state, all local programs that have been delegated for inspection and enforcement authority for erosion sediment control, and the representatives of the Phase 1 NPDES MS4 permitted community, because erosion and sediment control is a component of those permits. So welcome everyone. Our aim is to have somewhat regular meetings where we try to use this time to speak about current topics of interest related to sediment control. And this is one topic that has come up during our reviews in the fall of delegated programs. It's a pretty specific topic that we're focused on today. Creating high quality inspection reports. The target audience of this document and this guidance are the delegated local enforcement programs, but we believe when we were putting this together, we felt like this is really good general information that can apply to any kind of inspection. So our hope is that everyone learns something today and gets something out of today's discussion. But first I want to emphasize that the local delegated programs are really doing a great job getting the job done, making sure controls are maintained and preventing offsite discharges. We've seen these programs have really built strong relationships with operators and contractors on site, and they have set their expectations, so everyone understands on site what needs to be done. We created this guidance because that wasn't always reflected in the paperwork. Just that missing piece of writing it down clearly and fully and creating a record of all that hard work. And so especially as we all start to move from paper to electronic reports, all our programs are evolving with new technology. We felt that this was a good point to step back and remember what is our goal and make sure that reports, in whatever format they're in, present the full picture of what's going on site. And I'm getting a message that maybe you're not hearing me clearly. Is that correct? Am I kind of cutting in and out? Oh, I hope not. Sorry about that. So like I said, today's meeting is being recorded. So let's see. So throughout the presentation, you can use the chat function to talk among yourselves. Looks like that is working. And if you would like to ask a question, we'll try to corral them in one place so that we don't miss any throughout, all the chat. So if you'd like to ask a question, in the bottom right corner, you will see a little collection of shapes, a triangle, a square, and a circle. You click on that, and it'll bring up a list of activities that you can select and go to Q&A. Click on that, and it should open up a box where you can click Ask a Question, and there will be a little text box where you can type in your thoughts, your questions, and then click Post. And so try to do that, if you have a question for us, and we'll build in some breaks today to try to go through those. We should have plenty of time. If you have any issues with that process, then definitely you can always just try to enter your question in the chat, and we'll try to go back through those and make sure that we see all of them. So this is our agenda for today. I'm first going to open up the floor to a few staff members here with the Stormwater Dam Safety and Flood Management Program to see if there are any opening comments they would like to make. So that would be Stu Comstock, Ray Barr, and Jennifer Smith. And then after that, I'll walk us through the minimum requirements per the Code of Maryland, COMAR, for what is required to be in an inspection report. And then beyond those basics, Devin Kosiski will walk us through the recommendations and best practices. And then Pat Depkin will take us through some examples, and there will be some good and some bad, some strengths and weaknesses to each of these different examples that we can kind of discuss as a group. So we'll try to do that. I realize there are a lot of people here, but maybe we can walk through those examples and have a discussion, and then we'll open up the floor to questions, general questions from anyone. So first, I'd like to ask Stu Comstock, Chief of Program Review, if there are any comments that you would like to add before we get started.
Thank you, Michelle. And these are completely off the cuff because this is taking me by surprise. But I just first of all want to thank Michelle, Devin, and Pat for putting this together. They've been working really hard on this. They also worked very hard throughout the delegation season. I also want to thank all of you for showing up today because this is a good forum to not only talk about inspection reports, but just other things that are affecting the community. Thank you all for your continued patience and cooperation. So again, Michelle, Devin, and Pat, good work. On with the show.
All right.
Jennifer has, I think you're good, Jennifer, and so thank you.
Okay, thanks. So before we get on to the main show, there are just a couple quick housekeeping items I'd like to go over. This is a reminder of what we shared in our September presentation. Just a reminder that the 2011 standards and specs, throughout that document, some specific materials are called for, are required, and inspectors, we just like to remind everyone you should do your due diligence and ensure that the proper materials are used and that you flag anything that does not meet the standards and make sure that those are corrected. And just one other reminder that flocculants can be applied throughout the state of Maryland for sediment control. It is allowed, but under certain restrictions, and there is a procedure to go through that, and there are requirements. And so you must apply for a state permit. That could be the construction general permit. It could be a different kind of industrial permit, but state permit coverage is required to apply flocculants in Maryland. And if it is done without a state permit, then that is an illicit discharge. And so please, get that state permit approval. I'm listing the phone number, hotline, and the website of that program, the Industrial Permits Program, that can walk you through that process. And please coordinate with your department construction inspector during application to make sure that all those requirements are followed. So moving on to our topic today, I, Pat Depkin, and Devin Kosiski will be presenting this information and answering your questions today on inspection reports. So first, I'd like to give a little background of who we are. I am a natural resources planner with MDE. I've been with the state for about 10 years. Before that, I studied wetland science, both freshwater and coastal wetlands. I focused on the invasive Phragmites australis, so I have a lot to say about that if you ever want to have a conversation about frag. I also worked in the private consulting world for a few years and did a little bit of teaching. So water quality has always been a real focus of mine. And I'd like to turn it over to Pat, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Glad to see everybody here. Some of you probably know me from other presentations or visits in the field. I got started in the business as a consultant, geotechnical consultant, construction inspection way back in 1989. And throughout the course of my career, I've worked for various consultants in various capacities, typically related to large and small job sites. I ran a soils lab for about 15 years as part of that consultant work. So I've got a pretty, I like to think that I've got a pretty fair handle on soils and how they behave and why they do what they do and which ones are problematic and so on and so forth. I've also acted as project manager for various construction jobs, utility work and sidewalk work, milling and overlay paving, pretty much anything that has to do with construction. And I've been with MDE coming up on just about 9 years now. So it's been an interesting comparison and contrast between the private sector and the public sector, but at the end of the day, the physics remain the same. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Devin to introduce himself. Thanks for showing up, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Pat. And like Pat said and Michelle said, welcome everyone. We're very pleased that you all are joining us this afternoon. My name is Devin Kosiski. I'm a natural resources planner with the Department of the Environment here in the Program Review Division. I work very closely with Michelle and Pat in Erosion and Sediment Control Delegation Review, and I'm also the permanent administrator for Howard County. And so I help out with a little bit of GIS stuff and stormwater management, a little bit of everything. A little bit about my background. I went to a university in Maryland, studied environmental science, tech and design there for my undergrad degree. So I learned a lot, took many soils classes, did research on Lairland Farm with blueberries, a lot of plant knowledge. I also worked at the Howard County Conservancy before working here for MDE, where I gained a lot of experience with Maryland Master Gardeners, working in the community gardens, running school programs with the children, teaching them different aspects and features of soil, nature, all sorts of stuff. And I was also a cultivation director in the private agricultural industry before this. So I'm very familiar with all sorts of things, erosion, sediment control, and with agriculture. So very pleased today to be a part of this presentation and to be here with you guys today. So we'll turn it back over to Michelle to go over the rest of the next slides.
Thank you. I'm sharing a little text in here. I just want to make it clear, if there's someone you think we've left off, they're ready and waiting at their computer, you can share the meeting link with them and they can enter. They don't need, an invite directly from us. They don't need to RSVP. They can just take that link from this calendar invitation, from this calendar meeting, and just punch it into their browser. So before we talk about the recommendations and the best practices, let's start with the basics. What must go in a report, and this is straight from the Code of Maryland. There are 2 sections that speak to the required components of an inspection report, and we have placed the full language here, so you don't have to go hunting for it. It's on these 2 slides. And so first, COMAR requires that you prepare a written inspection report, and written does not have to mean printed. It can be digital, and we'll speak more to electronic reports later on today. It must include the date and location of the site inspection, whether the approved plan has been properly implemented and maintained. And that's important to note. We're calling out maintenance. Maintenance is a constant, as we all know. Are your controls, your practices, and your plans, your erosion sediment control plans, maintained? Is everyone able to see? We should be on slide 9. Are y'all seeing something different? Okay. So are your controls and your overall plan working to get the job done, keeping sediment on the site? If a violation exists, what is the type of enforcement action taken? So that could be, a wide range depending on your process. It could be a notice of violation, a stop work order, a fine, whatever that would be. And a quick description of your minor or major modifications. It's important, in other words, that you keep a current copy of the plans and whether there have been any changes or updates to those plans. And you should keep them on site, and you should make sure that everyone has the latest copy with all the up-to-date information. And so the second section of COMAR, speaking to inspection reports, talks about what must go in writing if there is a violation. You need to notify the on-site personnel and the owner and developer in writing. Again, that could be digital or paper, when there's a violation that's observed. So, for example, it could be the perimeter silt fence on the east side of the job is missing. It doesn't have to be a novel. What is the nature of the violation? That quick description. And there are 2 other things that are required, but that we don't always see in the inspection reports that we've observed. And that's what is the required corrective action. Again, it doesn't have to be a novel. It could be, replace the silt fence on that side. And the time period to have the violation corrected. In other words, the deadline. So, by the end of the day or in 7 days, that has to be stated in the write-up. And so this will make sure that everyone is clear on what you saw and what needs to be corrected and when. It's in writing in this document that has been given to all responsible parties, and that it removes confusion, and it also creates a paper trail so that you know what your next steps are if you come back as an inspector and this isn't corrected, or if another inspector has to do that follow-up visit, there's no back and forth trying to figure out what was done, what must be done, what was seen. And so this is all what COMAR requires. You can see this is fairly basic, but there is a whole lot more that goes into a good inspection report. And so I'm going to turn it over to Devin Kosiski to talk about what we recommend you include in your reports beyond these basics.
Thank you, Michelle. And as Michelle alluded to, again, these inspection reports don't really have to be novels, but there are certain information that's required that you guys just saw in COMAR, in state regulations. And there's also certain aspects of inspection reports that we would like to see. So what I'm going to be presenting are more so the department's recommendations on what we prefer to see in inspection reports. So the first thing is we do like to see kind of like for the overall inspection report, remember the purpose of it. So provide a clear understanding of the site conditions, the issues observed, and then any follow-up actions needed that day. So it's really what's going on the site today, the who, what, where, when, and why. Really just have those questions in your head and answering them as you go through your inspection report. And ideally, it should be a pretty complete inspection report. You do want to paint a picture of what is happening on site that day. So kind of like Michelle said, if you guys going on these inspections, if you see somewhere on the site that a silt fence is either torn or damaged or needs maintenance, put a little bit more context as to maybe where the silt fence was, what side of it, that kind of thing, so that the contractors and whoever's involved with implementing this maintenance has an easier time doing it, so that the problems can be corrected. And again, as I mentioned, we do need more than what's the minimum that's required in COMAR in order to, really achieve a nice, effective inspection report. And Michelle, you can go on to the next slide. So there's basically, we kind of broke this up into different categories of an inspection report. So there's different components of how we're going to go through this presentation here, and kind of the sections that we kind of look at or identify in an inspection report. First one's the header or background information. So right off the bat, we always want to see the inspector name. Always identify yourself. This is a reflection on your work and your guidance out in the field. This is a reflection on your job. So definitely identify who you are. It's almost like, I know that we are all probably remember being in school with the SATs and that kind of thing. I think they would give you points even just for putting your name on there. So yeah, they tried to get us while we were young. But no, that is something that's very crucial to include. Definitely identify yourself, who you are, and provide some contact information too. Just in case whoever's receiving this report, provide at least a phone number and email. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be both, but there should be a good contact information and a way for anyone involved with this site or anyone reviewing the inspection report so they can contact you as the inspector if they have any follow-up questions. Obviously, put the date and time of the inspection. We have seen sometimes in some of the reports, especially with the electronic automated reports, where sometimes the date is automatically populated based on when you might be filling out or entering the inspection within the database. So just make sure that the date and time of inspection is accurately reflected as to the date and time that you actually were there in the field inspecting that construction site. We also like to see an inclusion of the type of weather that was going on at the time of the inspection. We know that you guys aren't meteorologists, so you don't have to put, oh, the barometric pressure was, whatever, and it was raining, and, don't need to put that far as into detail. Something simple as maybe the estimated temperature and maybe sunny or windy, cloudy, overcast, something like that. So it provides a little bit more context as to the background of what was inspected that day. And then also include the job site name and address or the location. That's extremely helpful when obviously someone's trying to find the site, or if there's follow-up action. Let's say maybe you as the inspector gets sick one day and someone else needs to pick up the inspection for you. It's always a good idea to be able to have some sort of identifier on the inspection report, so anyone looking at that report can find that site where the inspection occurred. Next slide, Michelle. All right, so the next section, so that was kind of like the header background information of an inspection report. The next section, we kind of broke into the scope of the inspection. So obviously the scope is kind of providing like a brief summary of the site activity at the time of the visit. COMAR does require that the inspector conduct a complete inspection of the site. So here at MDE, we do believe it's reasonable to include basic information on activities of the site that day. Again, if you have no comments about the controls or the site looks good, maybe provide a little bit of context as to what was actually happening on site that day. And there are, in a few more slides, we do have some videos that I actually took when this past fall when we were on erosion and sediment control delegation review, just taking a video of literally what was happening on site that day. So again, we'll get into this a little bit later, but pictures and videos, they're not required on a report, but by all means, they definitely help. Videos too. You can even look back through your cell phone if you're filling out your report. Maybe you want to add something to it. You can always look back at those videos or pictures and be like, that's right, I remember. That's what was happening. So that's very, very crucial to at least include. Again, like Michelle said, doesn't have to be a paragraph or a novel or a story, but just basic information on what was happening on site on the construction that day. And then we also want to document whether any prior issues flagged have been resolved. So that's kind of closing the loop, so to speak. So if there are any issues identified from the previous inspection, just make sure that that's noted and if they've been corrected, so that anyone looking at the inspection report and you as the inspector can kind of put that in your back pocket that, okay, that's been taken care of. I can kind of move on to the other aspects of the inspection. Next slide, Michelle. All right, these are the two videos. This first one is kind of showing what's happening that day. You can see a compactor compacting around the control structure for a stormwater management facility. So that was one video we took. Again, you can just look at your phone and kind of see what's happening. This next video is showing, as you all can probably see, a nice hydro seed application. So again, if there's nothing necessarily wrong with the site that day or anything like that, taking videos or providing a little bit of context onto what was actually happening on site that day is extremely helpful. You can go on to the next slide, Michelle. Corrections and repairs. So this is another, again, component. Sometimes this section might be a little shorter based on how many corrections or repairs are needed, or if it's, if there was notices of violations or something of that sort of order. If there was a stop work order, clearly this section is going to be a little bit more detailed than if everything was kosher or on point that day. So definitely provide a clear description of the issues that need to be corrected during your inspection. So obviously, if there's nothing that needs to be corrected, you can say that and say everything looks great, no corrections needed. If there are corrections, definitely provide a little bit of context and description as to what needs to be corrected. And what's very important too is a deadline. And a lot of these inspection reports that I've reviewed, that the rest of our team has reviewed, there's overall good description of issues that need to be corrected, but sometimes there's no deadline or a follow-up date as to when that certain correction or repair needs to be maintained or fixed. So just make sure you guys put a time frame in there. Clearly, the time frame is going to vary based on the severity of the maintenance. If it's preventative maintenance, that's clearly not going to be as strict of a time frame as if it was like a notice of violation or a stop work order where you might need something corrected, that day. So again, just keep that in the back of your mind that you guys are closing the loop and following those deadlines and making sure that they're documented in these reports. It's also a good idea to indicate what enforcement step the report represents. So, for example, is if there is enforcement that's needed along with the inspection, make note of it. Is it a violation? Is it a stop work order? Is it just a routine inspection that doesn't require any sort of enforcement? Just make sure that's kind of noted in the report. And again, that's more important with these electronic reporting platforms where sometimes there's binary choices and you can, select like enforcement action or none needed, or, if there was an enforcement action, just make sure the report kind of speaks and matches throughout the whole context of the report. We have seen some reports, and again, Pat's going to go through the examples. So there's some examples, good examples that we've compiled that you guys will see here in a bit that kind of go over that in a little bit more detail. And lastly, we do want to also identify who you spoke with on site about the issues. That is crucial. These inspection reports, honestly, if they don't get into the hands of the developer or contractor, whoever's responsible for making the corrections or repairs or maintaining and running the site that day, the RPC, the responsible personnel contact, it's almost like, then why are we doing this report then? If it's not getting into the hands of the people that need to know. So sometimes in the reports, it can be unclear as to who received it or if it was received by anyone at all on the other end. So just make sure that's identified in the report. No one was on site that day, and that does happen. Sometimes the RPC or whoever's responsible for the day-to-day operations of the site might not be there. Things happen. Just make sure, though, that you either call them or it's documented, or there's some sort of follow-up documentation or email to verify that you've done your due diligence and my inspection report has been received in the hands of the responsible parties. Next slide, Michelle. And then there's obviously the summary of the inspection. Again, like we've been kind of saying, we do not need a novel. We just need a brief narrative or description of events during the inspection that might have not been addressed elsewhere in the report. So this is kind of your guys' time here within the summary section to just kind of freehand other things you might have seen or your notes. There's no particulars that we necessarily are really wanting to see in here, but it's always good to identify who the inspector spoke with on site, like I was saying. Put your signature on there and the date just to verify that, hey, I've done my due diligence and I have completed this inspection and it's been received by the interested parties. And it's also helpful to have the recipient's signature and title and contact information, just to verify again that, okay, someone has received this report that is in charge of making sure these corrections or repairs, even if there's no corrections or repairs, just someone's seen this report and knows what I, as the inspector, witnessed that day of the inspection. Next slide, Michelle. Photographs. As I mentioned before, when we showed the videos, photographs are, you guys all know that saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Photos add significant value to inspection reports. They really provide context to help the responsible party easily find and repair the issue. It also will help you, honestly. We know that you guys are doing many inspections. We don't expect you guys to remember everything that's going from site to site. That's the purpose of these inspection reports. So taking these photos can really help provide someone, especially if they haven't even been on the site, what's responsible or what's going on. And I think Michelle, in the next slide here, yeah, there we go. You guys can see here the one circled image in the middle down there kind of shows an inlet, and it's hard to tell where that is on site. So you can see the picture on the right. It's not the same picture, but we provided that in there as another picture of an inlet to kind of show context as to where that was on site. As you guys know, there's potentially many inlets on site that could look the same. So taking a close-up picture is helpful, but it's also helpful to potentially have like a further back picture to provide context. Next slide, Michelle. So again, like I mentioned when I first started going over these recommendations, it's really what are the facts? What's the intent of an inspection report? It's the who, what, where, why, and when. Okay, so first is who. Go ahead and I believe each one has an animation, Michelle. So there we go. So who did the inspector talk to? As I've kind of been hammering down while I've been talking, who did you talk to as the inspector? Was it a contractor? Was it the subcontractor? Who did the inspection? Identify yourself and who was also present at that site and who received the inspection. Then there's the what. What was the point of the inspection? What was discussed? What was observed? What activities were going on? What were the issues, if any? Then there's the when. When did these events occur? And that's more or less making sure you guys have a correct date and the weather. So that kind of covers the when. For the where, again, pictures will help provide context to the where. So where did these events occur? What part of the site? What phase or section? Some sites, as you guys know, aren't all small, homeowner, small development sites. Some are massive, huge neighborhoods, or some of them are sub-developments that are built in phases. So like I said, a picture really helps provide context. Again, COMAR does not require pictures, but by all means, when we see pictures in the inspection reports, it puts a smile to our face, for sure. And then the last one on here, guys, is the why. Why did these events occur? And how can these issues be prevented in the future? And that's like kind of, again, identifying, what was the purpose of this inspection? Was it a notice of violation? Was it just a routine inspection? Why did this inspection occur, and maybe why, what was observed on site that day, maybe why they occurred. So keeping this in mind, the who, what, when, why, and where is extremely valuable in meeting the intent of an inspection report. If you guys take away anything from today, it's the who, what, where, when, and why. Next slide, Michelle. All right, so now we're going to take this opportunity to pause for some questions. I know that Michelle and myself and a little bit of Pat here, I've been speaking for a bit, so we want to take this time to, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and use that little square, triangle, and circle in the corner there that you guys can type in your question. Again, if you guys can't figure out how to use the Q&A function on Google Meets here, you can always type it in the comment box, just in the normal comments, but try and keep those questions inside the Q&A so that we can keep track of them and know which ones we've answered to and things like that. And again, if you for some reason can't figure it out, go ahead and you can type in your question or your comment in the comment box here.
Right, I'm seeing no questions yet. And we'll also have a couple more pauses during the presentation in case you think of anything a little later. So thank you, Devin. I wanted to go over our recommendations for record keeping. You probably already have a local policy for record keeping. We are recommending that you maintain records for at least 3 years, and that's to be consistent with the state's general permit for construction, and also for if you're within a jurisdiction that's covered under a NPDES MS4 Phase 1 or Phase 2 permit. So to be consistent with those, we're recommending at least 3 years. And we also wanted to speak to electronic filing, electronic records. Many programs are moving in that direction, and whether that's electronic reports only, or as a backup for paper copies. So as you move to electronic filing, make sure that your reports serve the same function as your paper files. Just like you have a copy of the documents that you're keeping on site in the trailer or in your office filing cabinet, where we put a few questions here that you could ask yourself. Can you read them similarly to how you read a paper record? And does it have all the same information? Is it clearly organized so it all makes sense to you, or to someone who's not part of your agency and not, familiar with your organization and processes? Can it stand alone? Does it provide the same evidence? Like Devin was saying, the 5 W's. And is it immediately accessible? So just like you can go and locate your paper copies and hand it to someone if an inspector drops by or MDE drops by during a review, are your electronic copies similarly easily shareable with us? So as we keep saying, these reports are public documents. They help you get your job done, but they are also a paper trail that shows you did your due diligence. And we always like to say, in a worst case scenario, if you're called up in front of a judge, you have these documents showing what your process was, who you talked to, what happened, regardless if it's a piece of paper or if it's in a digital database, is it in a format that you can share easily? And can you produce it in a reasonable amount of time? And we consider 24 to 48 hours to be a reasonable amount of time. And is it shareable in a format that's understandable and complete and clear? With digital formats, digital databases, they can get a little funny when you're sharing them. Sometimes it's displayed one way to you, inside your electronic system. But then when you try to share it with someone and they're trying to view it outside of that system, you're trying to create some kind of copy to share with them, then it can look very different, or it can become a little confused or partial. So you want to make sure that any platform, any software platform that you're choosing or considering can meet the basic requirements and the recommendations that we're talking about today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Pat to walk us through some examples of fictional inspection reports. We're including examples that have some strengths and some weaknesses, some areas for improvement, to try to get us thinking and talking about what makes a good quality report. So, Pat?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Devin. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to editorialize here for a minute or two before I get into this. What drove us to undertake this exercise was basically COVID, okay? We were put in a position where we were not going out and actually talking to everybody and visiting them in the field on their home turf. And we were put in a position where we had to do these delegation reviews based solely off of material that was presented to us, okay? And typically what we would ask for is, the basic stuff. Send us the set of plans for the job and send us your inspection reports for the job. And we started seeing some patterns across jurisdictions, things that we saw that we thought were problematic or had the potential to be problematic. And going back to the first part of this presentation, we wanted to review and go back over and discuss, what should be in a report. And the test that we came up with, or that I came up with, and we sort of adopted, I guess, based on mutual acceptance, is an inspection report should be able to be read by someone else in the business, in the industry, not necessarily by a member of the general public, but someone who's familiar with sediment and erosion controls and job site construction and site work. An inspection report should be understandable to someone else. It shouldn't need further explanation. It should stand on its own. Okay, and that gets back to some of the things we talked to before. If there's a violation and a date line is set for correction, well, somewhere in the next couple reports, we would expect to see that the correction has been addressed. Okay. If there was something that needed to be addressed and it was reported to the contractor or the responsible person or whomever is the point of contact on the job, there should be a little more information other than I told Bob. Well, a month later, or a year later, who's Bob? Okay. You said you told Bob to fix this, but it never got fixed. And we ended up with a big slug of sediment in a stream, but we don't have any idea who, no one remembers Bob. You told Bob to fix it, but who's Bob? We don't know. It gets back to, like I said, it gets back to, would someone with a reasonable familiarity with the material be able to read the report and come away with a clear understanding of what went on, what transpired, who was involved, and what actions need to be taken, and honestly, what the status of the site is at the end of the day? Let me just go back to what I used to do for a living. When I was working for a consultant, we did construction inspections in all different capacities. Sometimes we were documenting sediment controls. Sometimes we were documenting means and methods. Sometimes we were documenting. It could be anything. But the bottom line is, when the report came in, it had to be clear and concise, and it had to answer the questions that we've spoken to earlier. And it should be understandable. It should make sense. It shouldn't contradict itself. And with this, what I ended up doing was I had inspection report forms that I handed out to my people, and they had a lot of check boxes and different, for lack of a better word, tells or hints or subjects that I expected my technicians to address. But a lot of times that ended up giving them tunnel vision, and they ended up focusing only on speaking to those issues and not looking at the site broadly. So eventually I got rid of all that, and my inspection reports were a header with the information that we discussed. Where's the job, what day is it, what the weather's like, et cetera, and then the rest of it was just blank. And I expected my technicians to fill that information in, again, speaking to the items that we've already discussed. If there was a problem, what was the nature of the problem? Who did you speak to about the problem? And was the problem resolved? Yes or no? When we're getting into, as we've talked about, we're seeing a lot of jurisdictions move into electronic reporting formats. And a lot of these electronic formats are limiting the inspector's ability to fully describe what went on. They're consisting of a lot of binary choices. Yes, no, yes, no. And I'll tell you, there's one thing I've learned in this business is there's very few things that are clearly a yes or no. There's usually some nuance involved. And if you're limited to checking a yes or no box, sometimes the nuance and the subtlety and the undercurrents of what's going on are lost. So we're trying to promote, promote the generation of reports that a reasonable person that's reasonably familiar with these means, methods, techniques, and what happens on a job site can read and not have a bunch of, you shouldn't have a bunch of questions at the end of it. So what we did, and this was tricky, we don't want to embarrass anybody. We don't want to call anybody out. We don't want to point the finger at any particular jurisdiction or jurisdictions as far as their style of report or the format that they've chosen. So what we tried to do was sort of genericize some of these examples that we have. So we didn't want to leave anything in here that would identify the parties involved. So here, let's just go for this one, for this example number one, and I'll run through this. and show you some of the things that we ran into that caused us to scratch our heads or have to call back to the jurisdiction and speak to the people involved and to get clarification when that shouldn't be necessary. So this is a fairly generic example. We've got an inspection date of 4/7/24. Okay, the inspector was there on April 7th. That's great. Inspection status: reinspection is required. Well, that implies that there's a problem or something that needs to be addressed, something that they need to come back and resolve. Okay. The inspector's not identified. Let's not worry about that for the moment. Again, in the effort to make these generic and as neutral as possible, we've tried to leave out anything that might identify anyone. So let's just assume the inspector here was Joe Smith. The inspection type is described as routine erosion and sediment control. So we can assume that, based on what's written here, that this inspection is part of the every 2-week minimum frequency on a particular project. Okay. We don't have an address we don't know where the job is. We don't even have a job name here. Again, I'm not picking on this, but this just goes, these are blanks that we saw on reports that were submitted to us for review during delegation. So just keep that in mind. Parcel number, again, whether it's necessary or not, what we're after is, where is the job? What's the job? Where is the site? What is the site? Contact type, who knows? I would assume that you would write down the company name of whoever you were dealing with, whether it was a big general contractor like Kinsley, or maybe it's a small utility company. Again, whoever you're dealing with in the context of whatever issues and whatever you're looking at on that particular day. And then, we need a name. Who'd you talk to? Who received the report? If there were issues, that needs to be in the record, as we've discussed. So there's some checklist items over here. Now we all know there's many BMPs. You can't put a box on an inspection report for every BMP that's in the manual. So common sense would say, let's just speak to the ones that are in play here. And then we've got this pass-fail column where, again, it's a little awkward. I don't know that I would be using a true-false as whether something passed or not. But, that's your style. That's your report. Again, if a third party can make sense of it, you've done your job. So in this case, sediment trap. It's labeled as false, so we're going to assume it did not pass. And we've got comments, which is great because it tells us what needs to be done. And it says repair washouts around baffles, 3/30/24. So again, we're making an assumption here. We're assuming that this inspector or an inspector advised this contractor, this site, on the 30th that they needed to repair the washouts around their baffles. According to this report, the next inspection, 4/7, it's still needed. They haven't done it yet. All right. That seems clear enough. Moving down to the SCE. Pass or fail? True. It looks like it passed. It says it's being repaired and refreshed. We've got a date, 3/30/24. Again, I'm guessing that that's telling us that it was repaired and refreshed on the 30th. Okay. And underneath of it, we have repaired. And then it says super silt fence placed per plans on 4/7/24. Well, super silt fence isn't really part of the SCE, but okay. Again, not sure what that's telling us, but okay. The next item gave you an inflow protection. False. Apparently it didn't pass. And it says that on the 30th, they told them they needed to muck it out and fix it. And they're telling us again that on this follow-up inspection on 4/7, it's still needed. It hasn't been done. The stockpiles, sediment erosion control, true. Looks like it's passing. It says silt fence in good condition. But again, it's telling me that the silt fence is in good condition on the 30th. I'm curious as to what kind of shape the silt fence is in today on the 7th when we've inspected it. Again, it's just for someone that's not familiar with your reporting techniques or your format or however you're doing it. there's a lack of clarity here that we're trying to tighten up a little bit. We do like the fact that there's a general comment section here that allows the inspector to kind of write out or elaborate on some of these items that they saw. Again, I'm not sure how general comments can be, a true or false or a pass fail, but this is some of the corners that you're put in when you're using these electronic preset formats, and it can make life a little awkward and difficult to project what you're trying to say. But let's go to the narrative. So what does it say? No work on site today. Several items still need repair. That's great. It says that these items will be completed by 4/9/24, again, based on an inspection report from the 30th, or a conversation that was had on the 30th. Now our dates are getting a little wonky. It says heavy rain, no work on site today, 4/6/24, but the report's dated 4/7/24. Now you might think this is really nitpicky, but it's not. I go back to the fact that, as we pointed out, these documents are the official record. They're the official record of what went on. And they're also a reflection of your staff's attention to detail and continuity. So I guess what I'm driving at is, proofread this stuff and make sure it makes sense and make sure it's consistent. It's good to note that it's raining today. There's no work on site. That's perfectly appropriate. But the fact that the date is wonky kind of throws a question mark over the whole report. The next line item, the perimeter controls are in good condition after a heavy rain on 4/6/24, which was yesterday. So again, what is it telling us here? We shouldn't have to make these assumptions and so on and so forth, or anyone. Again, not just MDE, but anyone. If your records are subpoenaed by an NGO or an environmental group or a grieved citizen downstream, this stuff is all going to come out and it's all public documents. So it should stand on its own and speak on its own and present a clear picture. I would say, based on this, again, we've got some good stuff here, but we've got some stuff that's a little wonky. So keep that in mind. Let's go to the next example, please. Okay. Again, just looking through this, we're getting a lot of good information up top, a little more information than the last one had on it. When was his permit issued? When was the plan issued? Is the permit posted on site as required? Yes. Are the plans on site? Yes. This is great. The permit number, again, it's up to your particular jurisdiction if you want to include that information as part of the report or not. Excuse me. We've got, again, sticking to the left side of the report for the moment, we've got a good date here. We've got a description of the weather. It was sunny. Temperature may or may not be relevant unless it's an extreme. If it's brutally cold and you can't trench the silt fence in because the ground is frozen, that may be relevant. If it's super hot and there's a dust situation, again, that may be relevant. So, use your judgment. Is it sunny? Again, in the context of April 25th, 24, that's probably fine. Again, we want to know, was it raining? What was going on? What was the general atmosphere? What was the general conditions? We got a site name. We got an address, city. That's great. We've identified the inspector. We've identified who's holding the permit. So there's our points of contact. Allegedly, these are people we can get in touch with if we need something fixed. So moving to the other side, we've got the permit posted as is required. The plans are on site as are required. Is the site stabilized? No. Are the sediment and erosion controls in place? No. And what is the status of the site? This site is in non-compliance. Okay. As reported. Is the site in compliance with the current approved rating claims permit and code? No. But then we get to the next line. Enforcement action taken? None. None needed, it says. But then it says a stop work order has been put in. Okay. We've got the inspection date here, 4/25. We've got a correction notice. I need this stuff fixed. Of course, right now we don't know what needs to be fixed yet. Maybe the narrative will speak to that. So in the narrative here, the inspection showed that the site was not in compliance with the approved plans. A stop work order was placed. Following must be completed by the above date, and they give us the items that need to be fixed. But again, reading through it, I'm not sure what the status of this site is. Again, look at this from a third party that's looking at the document. What does that mean? No enforcement action was taken. Okay, but we have advised them to fix some stuff. But is the stop work order? It was bad enough we put a stop work order on it. So again, maybe this is just a style question or a style point, but I don't think that it helps the legitimacy of this report to have no action needed followed by a stop work order was implemented. So this is the kind of stuff, again, when all we have to look at is a written inspection report, and we run into these kinds of inconsistencies, it raises questions in our mind as to what went on. And it just seems like it could be done better. Okay. And that's what we're trying to promote here is don't contradict yourself. Don't have inconsistencies or other things on the report that are going to, draw questions. So again, we've got some good stuff here. We've got some stuff that's a little squirrely, a little questionable. And I would have to call this jurisdiction up and say exactly what did go on here. What is the status of the site? So watch out for that. Okay, that's just, again, this gets back to proofreading and professionalism and putting out a product that you're going to be proud of and it's going to stand up to a reasonable level of scrutiny. Okay, next slide, please. All right, we've got two reports here. We've got one from 4.1 and one from 4.8. Now, again, this is an interesting scenario where this jurisdiction is using an electronic format that is giving. They've got to pick their answers from a box in some cases. So in this case, we'll ignore the staff email stuff. We will presume that was filled in. Again, in the interest of anonymity, we're not putting anything there. The inspection number is great. We've got a date. Status, partially passed. Well, right away, what does that mean, partially passed? All right, well, let's see what the report says. We've got a good location here. We know where it is. And we've got some BMPs listed. Again, this gets into kind of style and clarity, but traps and basins, status, they're passed. And they don't even exist anymore. They've been removed. So I'm not sure, other than to advise folks that the stage of the site has moved beyond the point where the traps were required. I'm not sure, if the traps have been removed and the reports reflect that, I'm not sure that there's a need to keep saying that in subsequent reports. We got the same thing on the concrete wash station. It's documented as passed, it's in good shape, but then again, under the comments, it's been removed. All concrete work is completed. Now, what we ran into, and in the process of redacting or otherwise trying to make these reports somewhat anonymous, we had scenario, and it didn't make it into this example, but we had scenarios where concrete wash station was marked as failed, but then was marked as having been removed. So again, there's questions. What does that mean? If it's been removed, how can you mark it as failed? And in the context of an electronic report, the fact that you mark something as failed may trigger something else within this software reporting format that maybe you don't intend. So let's just make sure we're clear. Inlet protection is noted as passed, so we can assume it's in good shape. And then we get a general review. Status of the site, it's passed. It says all major construction's been completed, roads are paved, removal of existing asphalt, approved to start. That's a nice summary. Again, looking at this from an outside perspective, that tells me what the status of the site is. It sounds like it's pretty close to being completed. And there's just a few items to be buttoned up before it's finished. Um, Sequencing, I'm not, again, we may have screwed this up when we put the general review above some more BMP comments, but not to worry about that for the moment. Silt fence and super silt fence are marked as passed, but they do have some comments. It's passed, but we've also approved them to remove it in specific areas. And again, that's great. It gives a little context. It tells us what went on, why it's happening. We've got a stabilized construction entrance that is marked as passed. Okay. So we're going to assume that the SCE is in good shape. So that's one report there on the left. Let's go to the follow-up report on the right, the next one, 4.8. Okay. Again, we've got this partially passed scenario, which, again, to a third party without context, I would have to call up this jurisdiction and say, what does that mean? And that's the report shouldn't require a follow-up phone call unless there's really deep stuff that needs to be documented. Again, we've got our address. That's great. General review site. It's passed. Comments. We're going to continue to remove the asphalt on the last lot. Silt fence and super silt fence are marked as passed. The SCE is marked as passed. The inlet protection is marked as passed. It all looks good, but I keep going back to the partially passed at the top, and that would indicate that there's a problem, because the site is not, everything here is marked as passing. So why the partial status? Okay. Again, going back to that, would a reasonable person familiar with this material be able to determine what the status of the site is? And I'm not sure that that's clearly projected or presented here. Next slide, please. This will be the last one, last example. This is kind of an old school report. These folks are still filling them out by hand on paper. Again, the items on the left, as far as the permit number, date of inspection, we would expect to see all that filled in. The location of the job site, the contact person, their information, we would expect to see that filled in. The site is, in this case, they've been given 3 choices. Site is active. We were there at 12 o'clock noon. We're going to assume that's 12 o'clock noon, not midnight. The weather conditions, and it's a gray, drizzly day today. All right. Are the approved plans on site? Yes. Great. Has the approved plan been properly implemented? Yes. Great. Have there been any modifications? We'll presume there were none here. Moving to the right, were any plan deficiencies identified? Yes. Okay. So there's something to be done here. If a violation exists, what enforcement action was taken? And we haven't really, they didn't tell us here. Again, as an inspector, you've got discretion. Is it something that can be fixed within the next 3 days and not have a detrimental effect on the world? Is it something that needs to be fixed right now or by the end of the day today? Or, we know, let's assume that pretty much anyone not living under a rock knows that there's 3 days of tropical storm in the forecast. That's worth mentioning, and it's worth mentioning that the site's been prepped to anticipate that, and it's worth mentioning that the inspector mentioned it to whoever's running the site, so they can't claim ignorance when we get 3 days of rain and all their controls blow out, and they say, "Well, I had no idea it was going to rain." Trust me, I've been there. I've heard it all. So, in this case, if a violation exists, what are you doing? So we know there's a violation or there's something wrong because it's told us that there's a yes check mark here. Evidence collected. Well, how did you document the issue? Did you take some pictures? Did you just look at it? According to this, they took a photo. There's a spot for date, what date you took the picture. It's not filled in. Again, the presumption, we have to make some assumptions here. We're going to assume that the picture was taken on this date of inspection, which is not filled in. So it gets back to continuity and completeness. We just don't know. Additional notes on the nature of the violation, anything to be done. So here we get into the detail. Silt fence needed repair in several spots. The inspector talked to the owner, presumably told him where the silt fence needed to be fixed, and it'll be fixed by the end of the week. Again, let's assume that they wrote a date down and we know when that's going to be, and they're going to come back and it's going to be dealt with. There's a space for the inspector's signature and the date of the inspection, and the authorized on-site representative, if they're there, the owner contractor, and the date. If no one's there, if it's a rain day and you go to the site to look at it, no one's there, can you call the person? Can you email the person? You should make a note of that in your report. No one was there, so I called so-and-so and advised them of X, Y, and Z. Their full name, their job, what their role in all this is. I think that's about it. Again, guys, the point here is it's not to pick on anybody, but you have to look at these reports in the context of what they are. They're not just for your shop, okay? They are, as we talked about, Comar has an interest here. Comar is telling us what information needs to be in them at a minimum. But you have to understand, and you have to anticipate that these reports, as part of the public record, are open to review and open to being looked at by people outside, and they need to, they need to present the picture clearly, and they should not leave a lot of unanswered questions. And to again, worst case scenario, like I said, I was in the private sector for many years, and my boss used to tell me, when I was a manager, he'd say, Pat, at the end of the day, your primary job is to keep us from getting sued. And that's maybe a bit of a perverse and defensive way to look at it, but it's the truth. When my technicians generated a daily inspection report, I had to operate under the assumption that could end up being Exhibit A in a lawsuit someday. And that technician or myself or some other representative of my company was going to have to sit up there and defend that document. And you don't want to be in a position where you can't answer the questions, or the document isn't clear and it doesn't provide clarity and creates more questions than it answers. So again, we didn't do this to beat up on anybody. We didn't do this to put this together to shame anybody. What we're trying to do is kind of give you guys in the perspective of what, this isn't just a daily chore to be done. This is a real record of what goes on, and as such, it's public information. It's anyone can look at it. So let's present a professional product, I think, and that gets back to it. Let me at that point, I guess let's move to the next one. I believe that's all the examples we have, and at this point, let's throw it open. We want to hear from you guys. If you think we're being unreasonable, if you think we're setting a standard that can't be met, I'll leave you with one last thing on the electronic reporting. And again, I'm speaking from experience, not only my own, but other people that I've worked with professionally over the years. As inspectors, or as the manager of the Sediment and Erosion Control Inspection Department, or any other inspection department, people that have no idea what your job involves may be responsible for buying your reporting software. And that's a problem. I would strongly encourage anyone who finds themselves in a position of the management comes and says, "Hey, we're going, we're tired of we don't have time to store all this paper. We're getting rid of paper reports. We're going to electronic reports, and next week you'll get new software." Well, it would be really nice if the people that were buying that software knew what it was supposed to do. And in many cases, they don't. And that's why we end up with situations where the software, the platform that you're given to do your reports on, doesn't really fit the mission. And then you as the inspector or as the manager of the inspection department are put in the awkward position of trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. And that doesn't help anybody. So that message, that's just a blanket message that goes out to everyone, to their bosses. It may be shouting into the wind and never heard again, but it happens. And if you can get out in front of that and avoid it and have a little influence into any future electronic platforms that you might need to work with, I would strongly encourage you to do so. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you, Pat. We do have a question from Arthur Simpson. Pat, do you have any examples that were up to par or that exceeded the MDE reporting requirements?
Arthur, I would like to say yes, but and again, don't take this the wrong way. There's no phrase, it's like, age has given me the wisdom and experience to find fault with everything. and that's not really fair. There were some reports that kind of got the job done, but we really didn't run into any that really hit all the marks. Now, understood. We reviewed your reports. I think we sent you some comments and so on and so forth. But if you stick with the basic premise that if I can hand this report off to another sediment and erosion control inspector from another jurisdiction and they can look at it and it makes sense to them, I think you're hitting the mark. But it's the stuff that doesn't follow up, that doesn't answer questions, or that contradicts itself, that it makes our head spin. And that's you don't want to present that to the world. So if you keep that in mind, the rest of it will kind of work itself out, I think.
Yeah, it's a good point. And if I could add to that, there are many different ways that you can create an inspection report. They can be, select a series of boxes with pre-filled answers, or it could be, a blank page that you just write your observations on, and everything in between those two extremes. They all have their strengths and their drawbacks. And so ultimately, it will come down to the inspector's style, and it'll be influenced a lot by your own processes, your organization's mission and how you file your documents. So really what we tried to do today is kind of bring us all back to the middle, where we laid out the basics and then gave some recommendations beyond that and some questions to think about when you ultimately go back to your shop and try to create a report, a format that works for you. But that's a really good question. Is there a perfect report? Maybe it sounds like the answer is no. There are going to be some positives and negatives of any kind of report that you can design.
If I could add to that, Michelle's point's well taken. That when it comes to these electronic formats, and understand, we're not telling you guys how to do your jobs at all. Everyone's going to run their shop in a different way. Everyone's got their particular foibles that they put up as important, and others that are less important. What we're trying to drive home here is run your shop however you like. Organize it however you like. Train your people, again, to the minimum standards, however you like. There's a million different ways to do that and styles to do that. But when it comes to the product, and this, if you want to think about it from a manufacturing perspective, this report is the product. This is what your shop makes, okay? And as such, it needs to hit all the buttons. It needs to hit all the marks. To provide another example, let's say I'm a mechanic and I do an inspection on somebody's car. If that person takes their car to another mechanic, the other mechanic should be able to read my inspection report and understand it and get what it's saying. The owner of the car may not fully understand it, but another professional, that's familiar with the material should be able to make sense of it. And I think that if we stick to that as a reasonable test, and if you guys consider that in the generation of your reports, it'll serve you very well. It really will. Again, I'm not a career sediment and erosion control guy. I am a career construction guy. So I would hope that the stuff would make, if someone handed me a report, I could make sense out of it. And if I can't, I think that speaks to a concern that can be addressed. And again, you may feel this is being nitpicky or perfectionist, and we're not trying to be that at all. We're just trying to point out that communicate. Something I learned 30 years ago in a business communication class. It was like the first line in the textbook, I think, but it said effective communication requires a sender and a receiver. And if the message is not received by the receiver, then the sender has failed. So keep that in mind. We're not looking for perfection. We're not looking to send anybody out to be the model of how to do it, because there's a lot of different ways to do it. But you just need to check those boxes, and you can't leave questions hanging, and you can't leave contradictions in place, and you need to fill in the blanks.
Yes, Kim Grove in the chat has a great comment related to this. We learn best by seeing the mistakes, not the perfections. And so what we don't want to give the impression of is, we just showed 4 examples where there were some things that could be improved upon. That doesn't mean that all the reports that we saw during our reviews are poor quality. We felt that we wanted to share some examples that had kind of a mix of strengths and weaknesses to get us talking, instead of showing the perfect report, if that even exists, and then giving the wrong impression that there was a specific format or style that we're trying to push on you.
It looks like a question came up in the chat from Gil regarding what software reporting MDE uses, and I'll be straight up. I cannot answer that question. We in program review aren't generally doing inspections. Okay. However, the folks over in compliance probably do, and I would defer the question to them, and this is a shortfall on my part. I should probably know, but it's also likely, if I could just editorialize for a section, it's also likely that if our compliance shop is using a software reporting platform, a software-based platform, it's very possible that it was written for us by a consultant or a contractor. Stu, please.
If we can unmute Brad Metzger, he said he'd answer the question for us.
Okay, I don't have that button. We're working on it, Brad. I don't personally.
We got me. I'm able to unmute and
okay.
Show you my smiling face as well. So the department's one of the department's many primary databases, environmental tracking system (ETS), has a report writing module which we use. Various programs use it in various ways. So there's a whole data entry component, which then plugs data into a report, and there's a place to write the report narrative, and then it spits out as our typical report, which I think most people have seen. I could probably, given a little bit of time here, share one on the screen, but it's the reason it's a rather cumbersome and a little bit complex report writing platform for us is so that data can be pulled from the software after everything is entered. And there is a further part of it, which once a report is written, unless there's some reason why we can't share it, like a sensitive military facility, we have a button to click to make the report public, so it can the information from the report is then available on MD's website. So our system is sophisticated, not especially easy to use, but a couple days of training and the inspectors get there. Hope that answers the and then it generates a written report with letterhead, contact information, weather, type of site, what site was visited, all the things that Michelle and Devin and Pat have referred to. So if I can answer any further question, fire away. Otherwise, I'll leave it at that.
Brad, the question was actually, not to nitpick, the question was, and thank you for that explanation. I think the question was, who wrote our software, or do we use a name? And what I was getting at was, I wouldn't be at all surprised to find that it was something generated maybe by MES under contract or something like that. Not necessarily something.
I can't say who wrote it. I can't say for sure who wrote it, but I can say that we own it, and we have IT staff that can modify it for us. So it in the past, we've had systems that were owned by another entity, and it was difficult to make changes. But I don't know who wrote it. I'm sure we could get that information.
Okay, fair enough. I'll just share one experience I used when I was working for a consultant. We were doing work for a jurisdiction under contract, and it was stormwater inspections, triennials, and the software that they were using. My best understanding was it had originally been written for, I think, grocery store inventory control and tracking. And it had been massaged and modified and twisted to kind of try to sort of make it work for the stormwater management world. And I found it to be less than satisfactory. But again, not my show. I just had to use the tool. I didn't have to pay for it, and I didn't have to manipulate it. One last thing, and Brad, again, your comment kind of pinged on this. There's a couple different agendas at play, and Brad mentioned the database. All the jurisdictions are collecting a lot of data. A lot of it's linear data that can be effectively put into a database and cataloged and searched. But when it comes to a report, an inspection report, there's always going to have to be a place for that inspector's narrative. And I don't know of any way, shape, or form to make those narratives database searchable friendly. I again, maybe artificial intelligence will figure it out, but I certainly cannot. So if the report formatting is attempting to do both, I'm afraid it probably won't do either very well. And that's kind of I think maybe that's part of the struggle that a lot of the jurisdictions are dealing with. But again, I'm just hypothesizing at this point, and I'll stop.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pat and Brad. There was a question, will we share this recording or send a link? So in the next few days, we hope to have the document all wrapped up. And at that point, we will post this recording and the document itself on our website. And I will try to send that to everyone who is on the original invite list in an email, but it might, bounce. So you can always just go to our website to find that. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions.
Going once, going twice. And look, anybody that comes up with any questions or concerns after the fact, please feel free to drop us an email. The objective here, again, is not to pick on anybody or wave our dirty laundry out in public, but it's to make everybody better, and that's all we're trying to do is make everybody's hopefully make your job a little easier, knowing what we're looking for and what's expected. And when I say we, it's kind of a collective we. I don't mean to speak for MDE specifically, but again, to anybody that might have an interest in these documents, and re-emphasizing the fact that they are public documents. And I would hope that we all want our public documents to stand up to scrutiny in the public eye and look sharp and be professional and get the job done. So that's, you know, we're never going to attain perfection, but we can try. We can keep working toward it. So we're all going to do the best we can. And again, please, questions, concerns, issues, you want to tell us we're full of it, that's fine too. But again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to entertain any discussion.
Yes, exactly. And if there are ideas for future outreach meetings, any current topics you'd like to discuss, you know, we are very much open to hearing those. So just a couple more slides. Wanted to share a few training resources that most of you are probably familiar with, but just to put them up there. And you know, hopefully as we continue these sessions, that we can start making this list longer and longer. And finally, if you had any questions, here's our contact information. And thank you everyone for your time today and for your thoughts.